Hi there. This is Masanneh and Ceesay, PhD student at ISM. Today I'll be presenting on the model Global Economics and Competitiveness, part two of the model, with the presentation will focus on creating lessons learned from the model, the part two of the model, which deals with how nations can improve their global competitiveness, thereby registering economic development. So, how can nations go about creating an enabling environment for it to be competitive? So, the presentation will look at the foundations of international trade. Some of the how the trade theory, international trade theory has evolved over time. So it started with the mercantile theory, which basically emphasized that accumulation of wealth can be done through trade surplus. That is making sure that your export is more than your import, and which eventually would lead to you increasing the amount of gold and silver that you have in store as a country. And the more gold and silver you have, the more powerful you become, and then you're able to expand your empire. This was the trade model that was in place all the way until around from the 16th to the 17th century. And then Adam Smith came up with the concept of absolute advantage in his book, The Wealth of Nation. And Smith emphasized that nations should specialize in goods that they can produce most efficiently to be able to benefit from trade. And he disagrees strongly with the idea that for gains from trade, according to the mercantile, is usually a zero-sum game. That is, when two countries are into trade, one country gets gains 100%, while the other partner gets zero. And Smith's absolute advantage theory was later worked on by Ricardo, who came up with the concept of comparative advantage. And basically, the comparative advantage theory proposed that nations should specialize. And how should they determine what product or service they should specialize in? It's if, for instance, they're producing two goods, say good A and good B, and the opportunity cost between these two goods, the one with the lowest opportunity cost, that's the one that they should specialize for them to be able to maximize their benefits from international trade. Another trade theory, again, it must be said that the theory of comparative advantage is still in use by countries as well as mainstream economics. The other concept meets the other theory of trade, which is most recent. It's the Pax oil model, which basically suggests that factors of production, countries are endowed with these factors of production in different ways. So, for instance, there are countries that are endowed with abundance of labor, while other countries have abundance of capital. So, and then what the Hex oil model basically proposes that when a country should specialize in the production of goods that matches with the factor that they're endowed with. So, for instance, if a country is endowed with enormous amount of labor, then they should focus on labor-intensive goods, producing labor-intensive goods. And if they're endowed with a lot of capital, they should focus on capital-intensive goods. So, basically, those are some of the national trade theories. So, this is graph from the contact and WTO historical data. So it basically shows how merchandise trade, global merchandise trade has been evolving from 2015 all the way to 2025. So you notice this 10-year period, there's been a steady increase in global trade, merchandise trade. Despite the political difference, ideological difference, as well as the geopolitical alignment and realignment. And trade still remains to be booming and expanding quite rapidly. So if you notice from 2015, there's been a steady increase. The only time we notice a decline, a sharp decline, for that matter, it's in 2020. That's the fourth quarter and second quarter of 2020. This is the same period that the COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, and thereby disrupting supply. And when that happened, of course, that slows down the merchandise trade because transport sector was significantly impacted by COVID, as it does to almost all sectors. So but then, despite COVID and all the other things, because people must live, and then the countries needs each other to be able to remain relevant or to even continue existing, because no country produces all that it needs. So as a result, you notice even that same year that COVID was at its peak, that's the second half of 2020 all the way to 2021, you could see in the graph that the international merchandise trade was picking up, and it keeps expanding from there onwards. Another concept that we want to discuss is the concept of free trade agreement. So again, it's two free trade agreement significantly expanded over time. Now, as of 2021, 75% of global trade volume is conducted under the framework of free trade agreement. And free trade agreement has a lot of advantages, such as it encourages economic growth, job creation, as well as increased efficiency. And also it enables citizens of the different countries to be able to consume or use services that are not available within their country, or they are not produced within their country. But they can get these services or products at a reasonable price because of free trade agreement. Because whenever trade is not free, it attracts cost, and this cost is usually borne by the final consumers, because the businesses will ensure they transfer the burden to the final consumer. Despite these many advantages, free trade actually has its disadvantage. One of the criticisms of free trade agreements is that it usually results into wage competition, and it can easily disrupt some of the sectors, especially if you opened up, if you're in a free trade arrangement with a country that has an advantage over your country in terms of production of certain goods. I want to give an example here, like for instance, the Gambia and the Senegal are neighbors, and they have free trade agreement at a different level. So they're both signatories to the AFCFTA, and also they're both signatories to the Ecos protocol on free movement of goods and people. So as a result, and the Senegalese agricultural sector, it's more advanced and more modernized than ours. So as a result, they're able to produce agricultural product at a cheaper rate, and they're able to send it to the Gambia without any form of restriction. This has resulted into almost fizzling out our horticultural sector in particular. People have become discouraged because they cannot match the prices that the Senegalese producers are able to offer, because they produce in large quantity and are able to send it to Gambia because of the free trade agreement. So these are some of the negative impacts of free trade agreement. So government, in order to ensure that they navigate the very delicate, yes, they want to ensure that their citizens have access to things that are not produced within the country, but also they're cognizant of the fact that they need to protect their domestic industry. So some of the tools that are available to governments to be able to navigate this very difficult terrain is they have on one side tariffs and quotas to ensure they control what goods comes into the country. And another way of protecting their domestic industries is by subsidizing these domestic industries so that they will be able to get to maturity stage as quickly as possible. And then they will be able to compete with their peers from other countries. So that's what usually government does. But again, it must be said that tariffs and quotas usually result into trade war. A good example is when President Trump was in power between 2016 and 2020 in the US. He imposed certain sanctions on China, and China didn't hesitate to return the favor Because usually in trade wars, even if the country knows economically it makes no sense to go to war with this particular country, but because for them to be able to look good in the eyes of their citizens, they need to show that they can fight back. Right. So usually it will lead to retaliation is guaranteed whenever you impose sanctions on countries. Trade, any form of trade barrier, be it tariffs or quotas, they most likely would respond in kind. So there exists a UN body called the UNWTO, World Trade Organization, and the purpose of this organization that it's to ensure they manage disputes, trade disputes that usually what emerge between countries, and also the other role is to ensure there is fairness in global trade practices because, as you know, there is a heterogeneity in terms of countries among countries in the globe. We are different level of development. As such, if there is no proper framework that encourages fairness, trade might be one-sided in terms of gains from trade. The bigger boys would usually have the maximum benefit, whilst the smaller ones will be left with the crumbs. So WTO's role is to ensure that global trade is practiced in a very fair manner where trade benefits all the countries that participate. Despite the presence of WTO and other things, there's still some challenges that are affecting the benefits of international trade. And two key among these challenges is the intellectual property rights as well as agricultural protectionism. These two continues to still distort the benefits of international trade. Another concept that we've dealt with under this model is the concept of foreign direct investment. So again, foreign direct investment, it's on the rise, and this is largely due to globalizations, and also farms are seeking market proximity. So, and then FDIs have been on the rise, especially if you look at the amount of FDI inflows in 2021 was at 1.5 trillion US dollars. This is an increase of 64% from the previous year 2020. Now, FDIs has its many advantages, and one such advantage is technological transfer. Whenever farms come to invest in a country, they usually would come up with modern technology because farms usually would invest a lot in R&D, and that would enhance knowledge transfer and technical skills transfer to the locals. And the other thing is, whenever farms operate or invest in a country, they tend to create jobs, right? But then with all these many advantages, it has its downsides, and one of it is the risk of sovereignty, because when you have enormous amount of foreign direct investment, when foreign farms have a lot of strong foothold on your economy, when it does it, most time when policies have been designed, there is usually a lot of influence they would usually have on policy design, and because you're cognizant of the fact that if they should withdraw their investment from your country, the country might suffer a lot, right? So there's nations are struggling to balance the pros and the cons, and usually farms will be weighing against exporting or licensing. So also during the readings, we've talked about the issue of regional integration, and regional integration usually it's approached differently in different parts of the world. So, for instance, the EU, their regional integration was approached very differently from the one that we've seen in Africa here. That's the AFCFTA is one way of making sure that we have some form of integration economically through the continental free trade agreement among African nations. And usually they different formats. So you have the upper level, which is the economic union. An example is the European Union, where the economies of these countries are almost managed already. So, like EU, the monetary policy is centralized and it's handled by the European Central Bank. Of course, individual countries still have the other tool. Fiscal policies are left in the hands of the country, but key policy tool is centralized. And then you have common market. Common market is basically these two countries or more will agree to have free movement of factors of production, and in some instances, people, like the ECOWAS was some form of common market where people and goods can move freely without any form of restriction. And then you have this custom union where countries would have common tariff, external tariff. So they would basically charge the same amount to goods that are coming from countries outside outside those countries that agree that are not part of the union. And then you have the free trade agreement. Examples of what was cited: NAFTA. That's now it's referred to as the USMCA, which is the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But previously, it used to be referred to as the North Africa Free Trade Agreement. And then you have the AFCFTA, which is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So these different regional integration processes usually have very different approach to regional integration because they're cognizant of the socioeconomic realities of the countries that want to come together. Because countries can be neighbors, but they might vary in several ways. So some of the other concepts that we've dealt with under this model is the idea of clusters and the new economics of competition. So clusters are basically where countries can designate a particular geographic area and ensure that there is all the entities that are interconnected in a specific field would be operating within this geographic area. Now, what this does, it enhances economics of scale, and usually it enhances productivity significantly. An example of such clusters is the Silicon Valley, which is a cluster for tech. And Silicon Valley generates annually $400 billion in economic output, and it accounts for 40% of US venture capital. So when clusters that happen, firms, what they need to do, they need to be open to integration into a cluster. And the government's role would be to ensure they create this very enabling environment to ensure they thrive. So when this happens, it can be an example of such in Africa is Rwanda. It's working on this innovation city where they're trying to cluster all the people that are into tech and innovation. Technological innovation are centered around that particular city. And the government provides almost everything that they need. And Kenya is also working on its special investment zone, which is more also going to focus on automobile to enhance the automobile industry in Africa. These are some examples of clusters in Africa, but they're at infant stage. But one that is successful is the Silicon Valley one. I want to now talk about one of the most interesting materials that I've read into this model. It's Porter's diamond model. So the diamond model, it's basically a model that is designed to describe the effect that domestic markets have on the competitive advantage of either farms or nation in the international market. So basically how farms or nations can position what they need to do or things that they need to put in place to be able to be competitive at the global level. So basically, the model explains factors that can provide competitive advantage for nations. In fact, the water diamond model is sometimes referred to as national competitive model. So basically, it's a model that helps countries to become competitive, and it's used by both governments and businesses, and it focuses on the four factors, and these factors are: one, it's the strategy, structure, and rivalry of farms. So a farm's strategy and their structure, as well as their rivalry, helps them in terms of positioning themselves. So what does that mean? Because competition usually leads to increase in the productivity as well as the technological innovation, and it sets the farm's competitive power as well as its power to be able to create this barrier of entry of new players into the market. So this is once a particular sector of industry becomes so competitive, it gives at the global level, it makes it very competitive. And the other factor, which is related support, support in industry. So the related support in industry, what it basically does is that you consider both the upstream and the downstream industry that facilitate innovation through exchange of ideas. So for this particular factor to work, there needs to be two things in place. There should be openness in terms of farms should be open to each other, and there should be a lot of transparency in terms of how they do their dealings and knowledge transfer, because it's only through that they can spur technological innovation. So if these two are absent, usually that factor is usually affected. So the other factor condition is the demand condition. So demand conditions basically look at the market structure and size and of a product. So that basically is what drives innovation as well as product improvement. So if the market structure is right and the size is right as well, usually farms are usually willing to put in their strongest foot to be as innovative as possible and improve their products. Almost improving productivity becomes a daily habit for them, and it forces them to invest more in research and development, because they would want to be able to serve their market as best as they could, and this keeps them makes them competitive. Right? And the last factor, which is the most important factor, is the factor conditions. So factor conditions basically, Porter himself considers this to be the most important of all these other factors that we've discussed. So factor conditions are basically, these are elements that the countries or economies or farms can create themselves. And these are things that you don't inherit as a country or as a farm, but these are things that you usually would create for yourself. These factors can be things like skilled labor. This is something that countries can create for themselves. And then if technological innovation, infrastructure, capital, these are the factors that countries can create themselves. And they usually prefer to things that you can inherit, like, for instance, land, natural resources are things that you can inherit as a country. And usually that's not the game changer. So the game changer is usually things that you can create for yourself. And in this context, mostly governments and farms, there's the things that are within their reach. Like, for instance, government can ensure that the workforce is highly skilled, and that gives them a natural advantage, and they become more innovative. Right? And they can also make sure that the technological innovation is at its peak and infrastructure is right, as well as capital. So one way for government to accomplish that goal is to stimulate competition between domestic companies by establishing and enforcing antitrust laws. And the way governments usually would ensure that government can usually would focus on technological innovation is something that's within government's reach, as well as ensuring that the education system is right to build the right skill set. Right. And these factor conditions, the water the Porter's diamond model can be used by government to ensure they become competitive, and businesses also use it to determine where to invest their monies, right? Because you would look, no business would want to, if your business is labor intensive, you wouldn't want to invest in a country where you would have to import laborers. You would be attracted to invest in countries that already have the required skill set, right? And if your business relies a lot on infrastructure, you'd want to go and invest in a place where the infrastructure is it's right for it. So for governments to nations to be able to be competitive, they need to check all these factors, especially the factor conditions, because that actually matters a lot in terms of making sure that you might not have the right market size, and within the country, the population might be small. But if you get these factors right, the farms will be attracted to come there, and then you'll be competitive because you will have access to on the market. Another interesting reading was the economic potential of generative AI. AI presents enormous amount of economic potential. Of course, it has its downsides, like the issue of ethical issues and security concerns that people usually express on AI, as well as job displacement, because it takes certain jobs will no longer are no longer already been taken by AI, and this will continue to happen. So governments now have this are faced with this dilemma. How do they enhance? How do they balance this, maximize harness the benefits of AI, at the same time making sure that it is as harmless as possible. So AI has a potential addition to global economy of 4.4 trillion US dollar, but at the same time it can impact about 70% of work. So now governments to deal with the issue of making sure that they maximize the benefit that AI brings and minimizing the impact as much as possible, not to affect jobs and also the ethical consideration. So here the issue is that we've read it, that the American product issue of productivity gap, it's established through the McKinsey study that 10% of US is most productive. 10% of US farms are nearly as twice as productive as the median farm. So that is a problem, and that is not just unique to the US. Many countries, you have few farms that are very efficient and productive, while the rest of the farms are not as productive. When that happens, it affects the country's competitiveness at the global level. So some of the things that governments can do to address these productivity gap, it's one, to make sure you support those farms that are not operating at optimal level. Right? And you invest in education to ensure these farms are sometimes more the low productivities as a result of skill shortage or skills mismatch problem. So if you invest a lot in education, it addresses the issue of skills mismatch and skill shortage, and this can reinforce the productivity level. And also to encourage digital adoption. So governments need to ensure that they adopt to technology and the digital evolution, because the digital world is evolving quite rapidly. So it's incumbent upon governments, if they want their countries to be competitive, to ensure that this is right, they adopt technology quite quickly. And the same thing applies to the farms that are lacking. They could invest, train, and reskill their workforce, as well as integrate technology into their operations. That way, they become more competitive. More competitive. So productivity trend over time, like pre-crisis, that's before the 2008 financial crisis, there's been steady productivity growth globally. And then during the crisis, there's been decline in productivity level. And post-crisis, of course, there is a continued slowdown, but now there is more focus on innovation and technology. And then came the COVID-19 era, which actually forces people now to adopt technology a lot more than we used to rely on. So digitization has been accelerated quite fast, but then it introduces also structural risk along the way. And so, how do countries rekindle their productivity? So, this is a case study of the US. So, the potential gain, if they're able to revive productivity level, it's going to improve. It could add 10 trillion US dollars to their GDP by 2030. But then there are barriers. Some of these barriers are labor shortage and uneven technological level because farms are at different level in terms of technological adoption. Some of the farms that are most efficient usually technology is basically mainstream into their operations, whilst others are still in the process of adopting technology. So the focus should be and emphasis should be on workforce development, and this should be a continuous process as well as investing in research and development and addressing, of course, the inequities that do exist. So quickly, I want to look at the nexus between growth, capital accumulation, as well as innovation, because these are crucial for sustainable growth. So you need both capital accumulation as well as innovation to be able to have a sustainable economic growth. But what we've noticed in the reading is that innovation-driven growth is usually adopted by advanced economies as the developed ones, whilst capital accumulation is mostly what developing nations, so emerging economies, usually adopt. And for this to work, you need to have both in place for you to be able to have sustainable growth. One, to ensure innovation, it's in place, but innovation requires capital. So a capital accumulation also becomes important. Now, to be able to get all these things right is to make sure you inculcate the idea, the role of ideas, new ideas and innovation into the nation's modus operandi. That way they will be able to realize long-term economic growth. So what does all this mean for governments and businesses? So for governments, for them to be able to maximize benefit, to become more competitive globally, they need to make sure that the policy frameworks are right. So you have to work on your policy framework that encourages international trade, whilst at the same time you're protecting your vulnerable sector. Right? So, and then yes, they need to participate more in free trade agreements because this enhances market efficiency. What you cannot produce, you can get it from other countries at a cheaper rate, and you'll be able to use your citizens, or the government can use it for either consumption or to produce things that they need to. And then innovation and competitiveness would be something that should be a continuous. So you need to foster more innovation and industry upgrade continuously. That way you become relevant. And then they need to encourage cluster development, because once you cluster them, it's easy. They can be mergers, vertical or horizontal mergers between people in the same field. And then it's easy for government to be able to be intentional in terms of their policy for that particular cluster. And then they need to be able to manage FDI to balance the benefits of FDIs as well as the risks that is associated with it. So you can use the strategic incentives to align national economic goals with that of the ambition of the investor. And technology needs to be embraced. That goes without saying, because in the absence of those, it might not, all these things will not work, because whether countries like it or not, technology is evolving and the world is adapting to technology. So it's up to for countries to be able to lead, they need to embrace technology, and that way they can benefit. So for businesses, what they need to do in order to be competitive with their global positioning needs to be looked into. They align with trade theories like the concept of comparative advantage, and also look at the ex-oil in approach where if you know your investment is capital intensive, then you should put your money where countries where they've capital endowed. If your investment required is labor intensive, then you should look for countries that are labor intensive. And that is why usually businesses would hire the services of experts or some who have some understanding of the countries that they intend to invest or they plan on investing to be able to give them these guides. Um, they should opt to be in clusters because this helps in terms of collaboration and sharing of resources for easier growth and technological adoption. Just like countries, businesses also have to adopt to technology because as it is now, if you don't adopt to technology, you have high tendency of perishing because technology is the order of the day. And they should focus on innovation because oftentimes businesses, especially small and medium businesses, research and development is important to them, but usually they don't put in that resource to that matches the importance. And this is something that is essential for a business to be able to grow. So overall, both governments and businesses need to collaborate to foster an ecosystem that drive economic development, innovation, as well as make their farms or nations very competitive. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much, Prof. It's been an excellent experience, this model. Really appreciate your time that you've taken to interact with us. And it's really appreciated over here. And it is really my understanding of global economics and competitiveness has really been enhanced through our interactions as well as the materials that you've shared. I'd like to stop here and thank you so much. All right.